again, once you center the focus on the individual, then it becomes a complexion of that individual's interests. And if one individual does want to, his interests lead him to studying things in the way that ancients did it, so be it. But what I'm talking about can be done in any sphere of life at all, because it's mostly attitude. What I'm talking about amounts to nothing more than a change in a way of seeing. And that change of way of seeing can be done even within a sort of, to use, in parentheses, a capitalistic, modern, progressive society. I think that the core of the New Age movement attempted this. Of course, it got subverted again because of that overt collectivism that crept in. But in the core of religion, in the core of even the New Age movement, there was that original movement towards a man sort of asking the bigger question. It just gets contaminated. So, yes, it would be... I can't make any A to Z statement about that, because once in the moment that you put the focus on the individual, then it's up to that person to find out what works for them.
That's right.
And that can be where the freedom is. And of course that might be, a return to their own native roots or whatever, or a return to their racial ancestry and what have you. But it doesn't necessarily really even need to be that. It's predicated on the individual, somebody from a philosophical background, or whatever. And we see this change. When this change takes place, it can be doctors, it can be lawyers, it can be housewives, it can be mechanics, it can be anyone. And again, we must always remember that just because we have this idyllic vision of people living close to the land, that doesn't mean that those people were any less barbarous than we are today. So human violence, human atrocity goes back, to the dawn of time. I mean, Genghis Khan, whoever it was, wanted to wipe out the whole of Asia just to graze sheep. So, I mean, it's not, the unbelievable genocidal mania is not something that we just find today. It's been there from the dawn of time.
Yeah.
So it's all about the individual doing his holy work, and that is what really transforms the planet. The philosopher, for instance, Hegel, the German philosopher Hegel, said in philosophical terms what you have just said a few minutes ago, that we're moving towards an absolute state of freedom and a perfect state. Now, of course, he was grossly misinterpreted. They thought he was talking about a totalitarian state. He was speaking of nothing of the kind. He said that when man ends his master-slave relationship, when one man realizes that he is the personification of God, then it would never dawn on him to hurt another person. And when man evolves, all men evolve to the point where they realize that each of them are a cell within the greater body of the God force, the Spirit. They're basically a manifestation of Spirit on earth. Then it would never arise in them to want to enslave anybody else or put another man above them so that they're enslaved. That just will cease to exist. And when that point comes in history, and he did actually say it was going to be a period, that history will move towards this place where just all of these lies, you've been saying it umpteen times now in this interview, in this talk, that the time will come when all of these other modes of existence are simply worthless. Their currency, it becomes worthless. They become so devalued that people call for another way of being. And that being is centered in themselves. When they understand their own preciousness, when they understand the miracle of their own existence, it will never then dawn on a person to want to throw another person's reality into the shade. And that was Hegel's perfect state, when all men can live together in a very functional state and have that quote-unquote equality. But it's an equality of morality. It's an equality not enforced by Big Brother, who's going to tell one group that they're equal to another group and what all this nonsense. It's an absolutely organic awareness that we are all cells within the greater universal intelligence. And his word for that intelligence was reason. He believed that the human reason is literally the manifestation of that spirit. And of course that's arguable, but just in general, I would say that his teachings there were about that. We're all evolving towards this place where all these previous modes of existence are found to be ultimately unsustainable, and then they have to be replaced with something greater. And this was the core of his famous dialectic, again highly misinterpreted, of course. People have given all sorts of ridiculous meanings to his famous dialectic. I mean, in the hands of evil men, it becomes something evil. But his original idea was that just there's a natural organic process that happens within the mind, that happens within the world, that happens within nature, of perfection, of evolution. And that evolution is ultimately towards a greater sense of harmony with the universe and with also fellow human beings.
And it's that oneness, that understanding that oneness. And this, what we're talking about here, is going into understanding what balance is within our life once we see past this matrix of deceptions and lies.
Also, let's see. I'm sure you know Freud, and he gets into the ego. So what you're saying is we're basically living almost 100% on ego, and we've forgotten our spirituality. And have your studies brought you to the stories of how we had some kind of big event happen where we had to switch from our spirituality to our ego for survival? I don't know if you've ever heard that story, Michael?
No, that's not familiar.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if it was Freud that said that, but there was some event that made us switch to total ego instead. And so
I know what you're talking about. That's Julian Jaynes.
Julian Jaynes,
okay.
Yes, it's there, and many psychologists are toying with that idea. It's very central to my work. I think I briefly mentioned it earlier that there has been historical traumatic events that have taken place, earth changes and what have you, many events that then did actually brought about, literally brought about the kind of consciousness that we have today.
Yes.
Basically it can be seen as a wound. It's like any trauma that hits you, like a car wreck or a big earthquake or something. You can see metaphors in daily life where a person's traumatized by some crazy thing that happened to them. Or even if you try to slip on a banana peel, the whole of your body goes into becomes spastic. So this act of trauma happened on a global scale, perhaps not even once, but many times.
Yeah, I believe many times.
And it brought what we call the ego into existence. So we're healing from this wound, and that's the way I try to use that metaphor. When you look into all the myths of the world, they all talk about a great cataclysm and a great catastrophe that changed man, changed his body as well, changed his aging process, changed the way he ate food, changed the fact that he needed to galvanize into these kind of unsustainable communities, that he had to become a territorial creature, that he had to create inequalities and what have you. So if you can actually see it, it's right there. It's right there in the legends. It's right there in the ancient history of how man tried to survive when he was his consciousness was traumatized. So you have a lot of people talking about the physical trauma, but they don't often speak about what it did psychologically to us.
Right.
And also they don't really emphasize how recent this was. This trauma was just a heartbeat ago. And so most human beings today are reeling still psychologically. It accounts for a lot of things that go on psychologically. But how it ties into my work is that I see that the world controllers have used that fact to their own benefit.
I agree.
It's like anybody coming in a state of trauma. When you're weak, when you're disoriented, this is when you're vulnerable to colonization from outside.